So I've recorded this video a couple times now, and I figured it would be better just to kind of do it live. And the reason being was because the audio kept not being in sync with what I was actually trying to showcase in the video. When I did it the first time, it was kind of just a recording of a teardown with, kind of going in blind with repairing this. But now I've done it a couple times so I feel like it'd be better just to go through a tutorial since I kind of know all the parts work. And this will also show how to take the mixer apart, which is I did not have footage of on the previous video. So let's get started. If you are just looking for how to adjust the timing or just how to replace the control plate, that is in this video, but there are quicker resources. There's a video linked in the description from KA Parts Limited rather, and they have a very good video on exactly like what the timing should be and how to adjust the different plates and what the speed should be. It's a lot. It's going to go a lot more into the actual quick and easy solutions. This is going to be replacing two of the parts of the control circuit for the motor, so it's a little bit more in depth. And if you're not really comfortable working on this sort of stuff, don't worry. It's not that hard, and you might even learn something, which is, at least that was the case for me. But let's get started. So I have a about 25-year-old KitchenAid stand mixer. It's the I think Ultra Power. I don't know if it's an Artisan or not, but it's just a standard KitchenAid stand mixer. It's the plug into the wall with the AC plug. Oh, that's something I should mention. This, if you can't tell by my accent, is going to be a very North American centric video. The parts are probably going to be the same because whenever I was actually shopping for new phase control boards on eBay, they had 220 volt ones as well as 110. So, or they're and I know they go up to 240 and 120, but 220 and 110 were the regulators for the listings on eBay. And so everything I'm going to talk about here is American, like North American standard AC. So no DC, no brushless. As far as I know, I think this is a brush motor. But yeah, it is a. Oh yeah, I'm looking at the schematic right now. It's a brush motor. It's just an AC motor and some pretty straightforward but clever motor control circuitry that we will get into. I've listed the times here and here, explaining when the different teardown steps. So if you're just trying to skip through and be like, I want to fix my mixer, I don't want to listen to this guy talk, then you can go to those points for replacing the phase control board and the control plate. So first up, we're going to want something to unscrew it with. So a Phillips head screwdriver, preferably with a relatively flat bit, and I am notoriously bad for not putting it back in the screwdriver slot. So I got it though. Crisis averted. There's 3 screws you're going to want to get to. There are 2 holding this little band on. You don't actually have to take this off, but they say to on a lot of the videos, mainly because there's a cardboard filter on the inside. But the big screw is up here, and it doesn't take much to get off. So you just unscrew it. Plate will tilt off, and then you just pull it off. And as you can see, something fell. There is this paper cardboard filter bit. Mine fell apart almost as soon as I opened it, which is probably use and age and storage. So your mileage may vary. There's also a bottom flap that actually goes into this part, which works as kind of like a filter. Make sure to replace that when you're done. If you want to keep your stuff in working order, you don't want anything splashing up if you spill something and getting up on the electrical control, because you don't want to tase yourself. Also, speaking of that, don't work on this without this unplugged. Even if it's in a power strip, just unplug it. This is uncomfortable voltage. It shouldn't kill you, but it won't feel very good. So first of all, make sure that everything's unplugged and we can get started. So this is the control plate right here. This is this metal bit on the back, and I'll actually move the slide up so the exposure isn't too bad. It works by moving with the control arm. So for those of you familiar with a mixer, if you're looking at this video without having one, it's thanks for watching. But this is assuming you have this mixer. If you move to the stir setting, you can see that this white tongue, kind of plastic tongue thing, kind of comes out. And then the more you push it, it'll actually start pulling the plate backwards. And that actually works with the governor, which is on the inside, which I'll show you in a moment, to regulate the speed of the motor automatically, which is kind of cool. So you have 2 screws on top, and they're spring-loaded. The way these work is they hold the top plate in, and you're going to want to hold the nut while twisting, because that will allow it not to lock up. If you try just twisting out, sometimes the nut will lock, and then you just get stuck, and you don't want to strip anything. You kind of have to do them in parts because you don't want to bend the plate. So bottom screw you can leave. Oh, something I forgot to do, because I always forget to do this part, and it's a little odd. You're going to want to get a kitchen towel, and it's not for wiping anything off. There is a very sharp and thin and likely oily spring right here, and it's on a hook, and it actually holds the control plate inward, so that way it has an opposing force whenever it's fully extended. Otherwise, if you press the thing, it would just flap out, and that wouldn't really regulate anything. So what you do here is you get your kitchen towel, and you want to, it's a little finicky, and mine is really oily because I unfortunately had some lithium grease on my finger when I was working on a different plastics electronics project, and it got all over this thing, and it still has not come off. But you pull out the spring here, and you want to put the hook bit on your kitchen towel and make sure it's good and hooked in there. You don't have to push it through, but just hooked in there. And what that does is essentially gives you an anchor, so it doesn't get sucked up into the machine. It's not the end of the world, but you do have to take the whole top off and get under it, and that's a lot more involved than this is going to be. And it's a lot greasier, so I'd recommend kitchen towel method. Almost every repair video I've seen has a kitchen towel, or Forum Post has kitchen towels hanging off, and so that's what I'm doing as well. And I'm just kind of put it over the side. It's not going to do anything. Next thing is to pull the AC plug out, and you can see you have your 3 wires. You have your ground plug, which is going to be the big round one. And that actually, power shouldn't be going through that. That just keeps the outside of the motor and the shaft from having electricity, and if they do, it just goes straight to ground. And it should short when it does that, which should cause your fuse to blow. So safety, not your fuse, but your breaker to blow. And then the white is hot, and the black is neutral. So don't get them mixed up. The phrase is called, it's black and white, so I mean they're pretty opposite. Shouldn't be too hard. And then you have a couple other wires to look at. You have the red-white, which, so if I refer to something as red-white, I'm not referring to red and white. I'm referring to the red and white stripe. And then there's blue, which is over here. You want to be gentle pulling these off, especially when you put the control plate back on, because for whatever reason, the new control plates, the metal is softer, and these things don't exactly like to hook into them very well. So you go ahead and pull, and make sure you pull straight down on the red-white one, because you do not want to rip that off or bend it too much, cause it to short out anything. There's no power going through this, but you don't want it to like short to itself, or like where there could be a problem later. You don't want it to deform where it's making contact with something, is what I was trying to say. You don't have to remove the ground. Some of the videos have where you're removing the ground plug, which is on a big bolt right here. You don't have to do that. You just leave it. It's not in the way. You're just trying to get the wires off. You don't really need to have them in any sort of way, and you don't really need to keep up with the wires, because KitchenAid and Whirlpool made the phase board, at least mine, actually on their plastic for the control plate actually embossed as part of the mold the colors, and they're all easy to read. So there's BK for black, B for blue, red white for red white, or RW, and then red and white. So now that we have the spring undone, the plate disconnected from any of the wires, now we can take it all the way off. And we'll deal with it later. I guess I could take some time now to explain how it works. If you want to go ahead and skip to whatever's shown on the screen to the next part. Again. So control plate has 2 switches on it. One is the main power switch, which is this little, hopefully the autofocus is my friend today, which is this metal contact. And what it does is when the plastic tongue goes through the square, it pushes it up, and the plastic tongue has a divot in it. And this is when I say the plastic tongue, that's this thing. It has a divot in it, and it'll drop down, and this actually starts connecting the motor to the wall. So if your motor turns on in the off position, you might want to check this piece to see if it has bent or if the plastic tongue has come off, because you can still regulate the motor speed, but it will turn on in the off position, which is kind of spooky. Off should be off and on should be on. Also, if you don't want to have it like be loose to where if you have the where's the unlock, the mixer in the up position, and there's a beater with batter on there, and it just turns on and starts flinging stuff everywhere. So yeah, make sure that this is straight to, and whenever you have the plastic tongue facing through it, that it actually holds it upwards. Next up is the power plate. So this works with the governor, which is this little gold thing, and this has, we'll talk about the governor for a second. This spins with the motor, so you can see this fan motion. If I start moving the shaft, which is quite hard to do in this case, because you have to spin a lot of gears to get this thing moving, and one turn of the output shaft is like a ton on the input shaft. But this governor will actually spin, and there's weights on it, and when the weights move out, this spring compresses and pushes this kind of knob, this rounded off piece, onto this plastic plate, and will actually, if you see on here, pushes up these 2 contacts, which touch these other switches. So that plugs into this red-white wire going into the phase board. So whenever the motor is in the off position, they are not touching, and the tongue is breaking the circuit. Whenever you put it on stir, what it'll do is it will actually jump up to 120 volts for a second, and then it will, because of the position of the plate, these contacts will be open, so therefore no connection, and it will run at hopefully between 40 and 60 volts. When you put it in mode 6, it will make contact, but it won't be fully away from the plate, so the governor will actually regulate it to where it's running at about a medium speed, and then once you go to 8, then it will open up to where both contacts are closed, and therefore you're actually skipping the phase control board at that point, and you're getting full wall power, so 120 volts into the motor. And that's the kind of high speed mode. And then 10 actually pushes the governor plate even further away, so that way even if the motor goes faster, it doesn't reopen these contacts, and that will cause it to go even faster. My problem was number 2, or not even number 2, stir would go at full speed. And I learned that the hard way. I mean, it was kind of advertised to me by a family member who gave this to me. They told me that it had a speed problem. So I actually used to have a motor controller hooked up to it, just a very basic like dimmer switch essentially for electric motors, and it helped. But because of the way the governor works, it actually was causing it to bounce because it wasn't going the speed it was set at for the voltage that was going into it. And so these 2 parts did not agree with the dimmer on the motor. It just essentially was like, I'm not getting enough juice. And so it kind of run at like a staggered pace. It would just kind of stutter. Wasn't the best experience. But no longer a problem. And I found out why. So the next piece is the phase control board. And this comes out with 1 screw, which is kind of far back in the middle. And be careful to not lose this screw or strip it, because even though they're pretty easy to find replacements for, it's kind of a pain in the butt to have to go look for. I have a bunch of screws lying around, and I actually happened to lose the other one, and so this worked as a replacement. The screw I have here, but having to drive to Lowe's or having to go like dig through your drawers to find a screw is not fun. So this comes out, has a couple wires here, has red, white, red, black, and blue, and it's made of some simple components that work as an AC switching circuit. So there's some resistors in there. There's two capacitors. I believe those are just for decoupling. I believe there's a TVS diode. And I am not an electrical engineer, so I am just going off of what I read. But that should limit voltage spikes to not fry the board, which ironically is what I believe happened to mine. And then the triac works to cut the actual sine wave that goes into the motor from the wall, cut it into little pieces, and only switch the circuit on at different parts of the sine wave, therefore regulating the voltage. Because it's not getting all the peaks, it's just getting cut either halfway up or 2/3 of the way up, depending on how it's set. I don't know the pure math behind it, but that is the basic napkin knowledge on how that works. If I'm completely dead wrong in how that works, please let me know in the comments. But that is the short of it. And speaking of shorts, mine is busted. My old one, which I think I have lying around. So here's the old one. And it's very similar looking. The blue's a little faded. This thing is about as old as I am. But you can see they're pretty similar in design, which one would hope. So what happened is semiconductors, especially like ones used for switching power, can actually fuse in the stuck closed position, which means they basically turn into a wire. And given that my mixer was running at full power in the lowest setting without any sort of like input from the dimmer, makes me think that it had fused, and so I was actually getting zero switching circuitry. I was essentially getting full wall power. But with that combined with the fact that it didn't have a governor to cut the power, meant that this actually would run faster than it's supposed to and would run away. So it was great for like beating egg whites to make them, to aerate them out and get them into those stiff peaks is what a lot of recipes say. But was awful for trying to mix things or knead bread when everything's like put the dough hook on and knead bread. This thing would dry out bread because it would just send so much air through it and would just beat the crap out of it. Like it would not nicely like pull the bread. So anyway, gone off on a tangent there. So let's take you take this out. This is a replacement part. Both of these replacement parts were about $20 a piece. Got them both from eBay. Took a week to ship here. Make sure, like I said before, when you get the phase control board, that you get the 110 volt one if you live in North America. If you live elsewhere where they use 220 to 240, get that one. But for North America, 110 volt one, because I don't believe the 220 volt one will work. So now that you have it apart, what you do, this we'll just do it in reverse. And then we'll go to the timing adjustment. So get your screw, get your screwdriver, and then if I can not magnetize the screw and get it off where it's supposed to be, that's kind of a weird angle. Go ahead and screw this back in. Don't over tighten it, but as you can see, it has very little clearance with the governor, and these weights on the side, which are kind of hard to see on camera, but there are two weights here, 1 and 2. They actually come off, like they're on hinges, and fly outward because of, you can say centrifugal or centripetal, depending on that argument. I'm not going to get into it. But you don't want those to hit the solder points, which are conductive. You don't want them to short anything out. And you don't want it to short you out by hitting this, and then which is connected to the motor, and therefore, just God forbid the ground circuit fails, you becoming the ground circuit. And also, you just don't want it to bust the board again, because then you got to go and find another one on eBay, and hopefully they have some. This was the last part they had in stock for the particular vendor. This is actually from Whirlpool and not KitchenAid, but I didn't see any KitchenAid OEM parts on there. So let's put the control plate back on, and now that we kind of know how it works, I'll explain. You'll see more how the springs work. So we'll put this back in here, and this is where it's very important to hold the nuts, and you want to make sure that they're not on the. I'll rotate this a little bit. You want to make sure the nut is not on against the terminal, because then it will lock and you can't screw it anymore, and you have the risk of stripping the nut or the screw itself. And while these are also common machine screws, again, don't have to drive to Lowe's. And I don't actually have these, so if I stripped one of these, that would suck, because it is almost 10 o'clock, and I believe Lowe's closes at 9. So the spec sheet, according to what I've heard, is these are supposed to be a centimeter off. So that is from the nut that's tightened to the post to the plastic. You can eyeball it. Just make sure that they're level, because you don't want these to kind of flop or be off center, because then you'll get a surging effect, and that's where your motor goes, and you don't want that. The next thing to do before plugging stuff back in, the bottom screw, as you know, is not hooked up to anything. I'll actually be able to explain what it does once we start doing timing, but you need to take the little plastic tongue and make sure it fits in the hole. It's usually easier if you put this on the 10 setting, that way it is further out. So now you should have this sitting relatively stiff, and the next thing you need to do is get that spring back on. This is my least favorite part, because my spring is incredibly slippery. So I actually pulled it far out, which you're not really supposed to do. I don't think it's going to damage anything. It hasn't so far when I've done this. I'm taking this thing apart about 6 times. And you want to make sure it gets on that hook, and don't let go until you're very sure. And then you can crank it all the way back. It's easier to do that in the 10 position than the 2 position, and definitely in the off position. The next adjustment you need to make is the fine adjustment screw, and this screw really only comes into play whenever you're at 6 or higher, because that's when the terminals start closing, and this adjusts the actual tilt, which is more of a fine adjustment on the governor. And this one's supposed to be 5 millimeters, but you can pretty much put it wherever. For now, we'll adjust that later. We want to do low speed adjustment first. That's the important part. So now we'll take our wires. We do red, white to red, white, which is this front panel. And like I said before when we were taking them off, be very careful. It actually helps me to put my other finger on the top of this to keep it from flexing, and then just get a good snug connection in there. Next up is blue. So we'll do that to the blue terminal. Put that in there. Next up is black. Black terminal. And for good measure. And on this side, it is a skip, so it's not black next to black, it's black, white, black. We'll do black from the wall, and white. As far as I know, I have that correct. I think. No, I was wrong. Okay, so looking at the diagram now, the black wire is hot and the white is neutral. Not an electrician, so I always get those mixed up. And wire color coding, especially older wiring, you don't want to do what I just did. I just bent the red. Wire coloring is non-standard, so you can get all sorts of fun electronics where the wiring is just all sorts of the wrong color. Okay, next thing you want to do is tuck your AC plug back in there. So now we can test and see if it works, at least in the low speed sense and the kind of the coarse sense. So first thing you want to check is eyeball on the left side to see if that contact plate that we talked about earlier is open, because you don't want it just to turn on. If that's closed for any reason, make sure that the plastic tongue is through the square hole and that you're in the off position. Another safety precaution is use a power strip, and this has a watt meter on it, but it will work all the same. So plug it in, and then you have essentially a safety switch that's there. As you turn it off, that way, if you happen to wire something wrong, now would also be a good time to double check the wires. So blue to blue, black to black, white to white, black to black. red to red, red to red, red, white, off. But don't do what I just did. Don't touch them. And final. That's also a red, right? Yeah. Okay. That should have us all set to go. Oh, that's also white. Never mind. That's supposed to be white. Yeah. Okay. Always gotta double check. So now we'll put it in stir. Make sure you can see the power button. So mine's actually now running almost too slow because it's supposed to go 1 RPM. So right now, if we go like, guess how much a second is. This is much slower than it should be, and we can adjust that. So we do turn the mixer off, and then we want to back the 2 top screws out, and they should come out the same distance because of how screws work. But you can either eyeball it or count the turns. I'm sitting almost directly lined up with it, and I have my monitor behind me, so the lighting's good. So I'm just going to eyeball it for now. What I'm also going to do is, no, we'll leave that there. Now we're in the 2 position again. Now it's going much faster. That's almost a little too fast. So we'll give it a half turn. Now let's try it. Still a little fast. Get another half turn. That was turn. Whatever. Cool. So that's about once per second. The operating range is 40 to 64 RPM on stir speed. So now we can check the different power levels. So this is 2. And that should be... I actually can't tell from this angle. So let's turn it off and I'll take a look at it. Boop. Okay. Turn. Please turn. Stir. Okay. So stir and 2 are probably going to be very similar if, you know, they probably don't have any difference at all. That's because of the bottom screw. So we can turn that bottom screw to where it pushes out just a bit more. Only problem is if it pushes out too much, then you have no starting power. So you want to a little bit. So push it in. Cool. There we go. A little bit of power. Again, these are just steps. These aren't actually like sequential power levels. So you may not get any variance here. So there's 4. So 4 is actually having some regulation from the governor. Next will be 6. So 6 is the high speed mode before you go into full power. So next up, and you want to make sure you're holding onto the base for this one, 8, and then 10. And 10 is shaking my entire desk. So we'll turn it back off. So now you adjust the bottom speed because it's going a little fast for my taste. When you're in the speed 6, you should be getting 180 RPM. A good way to do this, you know, on your hand is if you have a watch, or if you can just, you know, kind of think of what a second is. You can count 3 per second because it's 3 times 60 RPM, which is 1 time per second. So I'll go ahead and cut the power to this because I'm about to touch the plate. I know I was adjusting the screws, but just don't touch any of the wires or the metal bit besides the screw. And I'm going to tighten the screw. I'm going to turn it back on, turn it to stir. So now 2 is getting a actually power increase now that's tighter. So 2 is running faster than stir, which is what's supposed to happen. It's only a little faster. So there's 4. Not quite 3 times a second. It's actually probably running a little faster than 180, but I'm not too worried about it. And there we have it. So now we can do the cleanup. And you can get to the fun part of actually making pancakes. So next step is going to be taking the filter and unplug it. It's probably not unsafe now because you're not actually touching any of the wires, but just because you're touching up here, unplug it. tuck the wires down so we can get the filter in there. The filter should sit, I believe, just like this. So you have a little cover over the top of the phase control board, and it should just tuck in. The reason you move these metal bits is to clamp on the filter, but the KA Electronics video, or KA Parts video, has that as one of their steps, but it's necessary for this adjustment. And again, your filter's probably in better condition, so be gentle with it. Mine fell apart as soon as I opened it. Remember the bottom filter, and there's 2 little grooves here that it sits into. So put that in there. Then go ahead and hook the bottom first. Mine has a damaged hook, so you kind of have to maneuver it. Also, it's very possible that your grounding and neutral wires get in the way, but you can kind of push them out of the way temporarily. Get it to where it sits in nice and tight. And if you're like me, you probably knocked the screw that you had somewhere amongst your desk. So go and look for that first before filming a video about repairing things, because you're going to want that. I don't actually remember where I put it. So here's what I'll do. I'll just leave this in the partial hanging position, and there's my screw. I usually put my hand down. There we go. And so that just goes back in the top. And go ahead and screw stuff back in. And once you get this all nice and tight, again, don't over tighten any of the screws. It's bad for things. Just rule of thumb in general, don't over tighten screws. It's not going to make it any tighter. It's actually going to bore out the inside into a cylinder and anything to grip onto. It's especially important, another tangent here, for like hanging things on walls. Don't have the drill all the way in the drill setting when you're screwing stuff into walls, especially if it's sheetrock or drywall. So now we have everything back on. So my stir speed's a little finicky because this thing's old, but there's stir, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, which is the rumble mode. But yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I dropped my filter before I put it in there, so I need to put that back in. But this is how to repair your KitchenAid mixer. I know the video is a little long. If you're watching this in more of a tutorial format, then I've put little markers on where to skip to things. And yeah, check out the other video for explicit timing, and learn to repair your own stuff, because it keeps stuff out of landfills. And if it's sentimental to you, you don't have to worry about throwing it away or keeping dust. Yeah.